Hello to everyone listening from around the world. Today's account comes from Sasha Reyes, 33, who shared what happened when her company fired her 10 minutes before her 4-year stock grant was set to fully vest, escorting her out of the building before she could say goodbye to a single coworker. This account has been dramatized to protect privacy. AI narration is used throughout. The experience it describes is real. Grab a snack, pour a glass of wine, and enjoy the story. 10 minutes. That's how close I was to my stock fully vesting when my manager walked me into a conference room, closed the door, and told me my position was being eliminated, effective immediately. Not next week, not at the end of the day. Immediately, while a calendar invite for my own 4-year vesting celebration, scheduled for that same afternoon, was still sitting unopened in my inbox. I want to tell you what happened after that, because it took my company 3 months to realize exactly what they'd actually done. But that part comes later. It actually started that same morning, with something so small I almost didn't think about it again, until it turned out to be the first domino in the whole thing. My badge didn't work on the parking garage gate that morning. Not the building door, the garage gate, the one I'd driven through at the same entrance for 4 years, same badge, same car. I sat there for 6 minutes while the arm refused to lift, until a security guard I didn't recognize walked out and waved me through manually, apologizing for a system glitch. That's the detail I keep coming back to, not the termination letter, not the box they mailed me 2 days later with my desk plant already half dead inside it. The gate. 6 minutes in my own car, at my own office, on the one morning that mattered more than any other morning in 4 years. It wasn't a glitch. I know that now. Access changes at Ridgeline data systems run on a nightly batch job. My badge had already been flagged for deactivation the night before, hours before anyone in that building had said a single word to me. My name is Sasha. I'm a senior back-end engineer, I'm 33, and 4 years ago I was employee 22 at a company that, by the time they fired me, had grown to just over 300 people. I'd built the reconciliation engine that ran underneath almost every customer-facing feature Ridgeline shipped. The unglamorous plumbing nobody thinks about until it breaks, which is exactly the kind of work I've always been good at, and exactly the kind of work that's easiest for a company to undervalue. 4 years is the standard vesting cliff for a lot of tech equity grants, and mine was no exception. A 4-year grant, worth on paper about $340,000 at Ridgeline's last internal valuation, fully vesting on the 4-year anniversary of my start date. Which was that day. That specific Tuesday. I wasn't the only one. I'd find that out later, but I want to say it now because it matters. Over the 18 months before I was let go, 6 other engineers at Ridgeline had been terminated within 2 weeks of their own 4-year cliffs. 6. Every single one of them cited for restructuring or performance. None of them given specifics. All of them walked out the same day. I didn't know that pattern existed yet, sitting in that conference room. All I knew was my manager, Grant, sliding a folder across the table, severance terms, a non-disparagement clause, a laptop return checklist, while a company system administrator waited outside the glass wall to walk me to my desk and then straight out the front door. "This isn't personal, Sasha," Grant said. "It's a headcount decision. Timing just landed where it landed." The timing had landed exactly 10 minutes before 4 years of vesting became fully mine, in a company where I'd never once had a negative performance review, on the one day out of 1,400 where the calendar happened to matter the most. Grant Holloway had been my manager for 2 years by then, promoted to VP of engineering the same quarter. I'd shipped the reconciliation engine's second major rewrite, the one that cut Ridgeline's data processing costs by almost a third, the kind of win that gets mentioned in board decks without anyone mentioning whose name was actually on the commit history. "We've prepared a severance package," Grant said, not quite meeting my eyes. 3 months' pay contingent on signing today. HR wanted this handled cleanly. Cleanly meaning before 11 a.m., which was when my vesting was scheduled to process in the equity management system. I looked at the folder. I looked at the clock on the conference room wall. 51 minutes. The equity language in here says my unvested shares are forfeited as of today. I said. My cliff is today. This is the vesting date. Grant's voice stayed level, the way it always did when he was delivering something he'd already decided you were going to accept. HR's read is that termination is effective as of this morning's date, which precedes the vesting timestamp. I don't have visibility into the exact legal mechanics. That's between you and HR. He knew exactly what the mechanics were. I understood that with total clarity in that exact moment, the way you understand certain things only once, permanently, and never again mistake for anything else. I need time to read this with a lawyer, I said. Of course, Grant said, already standing, already reaching for the door. Take the copy with you. IT just needs your badge and laptop before you leave the building. Standard process. A system administrator named Priya walked me to my desk. I watched her watch me pack 4 years of a life into one cardboard box. A desk plant. A mechanical keyboard I'd bought myself. A sticky note with a debugging joke my old teammate Owen had left me 18 months earlier that I'd never had the heart to throw away. I'm sorry, Priya said quietly, not looking at anyone else on the floor. I don't make these calls, I just get the ticket. I know, I said. And I did know. None of this was Priya's fault, or the guard's fault, or even really Grant's fault alone. Grant was executing something decided well above him, and I understood that too, standing there with a box in my arms and my 4-year vesting date sitting 51 minutes away, then 40, then 30. Nobody on the floor said goodbye. Not because they didn't care, because everyone on that floor had just watched exactly what happens to someone 4 years in, and understood, instantly and silently, that saying anything out loud might be noticed by the wrong person. I walked out through the lobby at 10:52 a.m., box in my arms, my badge already deactivated in my pocket like a coin from a country that didn't exist anymore. I sat in my car in the parking garage, the same garage whose gate hadn't recognized me 6 hours earlier, and I watched 10:52 become 10:58 become 11:01, and somewhere in a server I would never have access to again, a vesting event that should have made me $340,000 richer simply failed to fire. I didn't cry in that parking garage. I want to be honest about why. I'd spent 4 years learning exactly how decisions got made at that company, and some small, cold part of me was already doing something else entirely, taking notes. I drove home to my apartment off South Lamar, a 1-bedroom above a bike shop, and I sat at my kitchen table with the box still sealed, because I didn't have it in me yet to unpack 4 years into a room that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone with a much smaller life than the one I'd had that morning. You always assume a company will disappoint you, eventually. You don't assume they'll engineer the disappointment down to the minute. The mail had piled up on my counter for over a week. I'd been heads down on a release the 2 weeks prior, the kind of crunch that eats every hour you'd otherwise spend on your own life. Bills, a dental reminder, a postcard from a gym I'd stopped going to in March. And underneath all of it, a heavy cream envelope, my full legal name printed on the front in a serif font, Sasha Marie Reyes, a name that only ever appeared on my lease and my W-2, nowhere else. The return address was a law office on Congress Avenue downtown, a few blocks from the Capitol. The kind of address where decisions get made in rooms with a view of something. I almost left it under the gym postcard, the way I'd been leaving everything that particular week. I don't fully know why I opened it instead. Maybe it was just that kind of day, one that had already taken everything it was going to take and left nothing left in me to protect. The letter was from an attorney named Elaine Cho. 3 paragraphs, formal language, a request that I contact her office at my earliest convenience regarding the estate of Walter Reyes. My uncle, my father's older brother, the one who'd actually taught me to code, on a hand-me-down laptop in his garage the summer I was 15, back when he still worked as an electrical engineer before he did something with patents, which was as much as anyone in my family ever seemed to know or ask about. I hadn't spoken to him in almost 6 years, not from any falling out, just the ordinary erosion of a relationship neither of us had made time for. He died 5 weeks earlier. Heart failure in his sleep, in a house outside Round Rock I had never once visited as an adult. I didn't sleep much that night. I called the number on the letterhead at 8:10 the next morning. Elaine Cho answered it herself. "MS, Rays," she said. "Thank you for calling. Can you come in today?" If you've stuck with the story this far, it really helps the channel if you hit that like button and subscribe before we keep going. Most people listening right now never do, and it's honestly what keeps stories like this one coming. So thank you, genuinely. Elaine Cho's office was on the 9th floor of a building on Congress Avenue with a clean view of the Capitol Dome. The receptionist offered me coffee before I'd finished giving my name. Real coffee, not the drip pot that had been sitting half-empty in ridgelines, break room for 4 years. Elaine stood when I walked in, actually stood. The specific unhurried calm of someone who has spent decades in rooms full of complicated ownership structures and stopped being impressed by any particular number a long time ago. "Your uncle passed 5 weeks ago," Elaine said. "Walter Rays, he was 74. "I barely knew what he did for work the last 20 years, I said. "He knew exactly what you did," Elaine said, and slid a folder across the table. Cap tables, licensing schedules, revenue figures arranged in columns my eyes kept sliding off of because they were too large to hold the right shape in my head all at once. "After he left his engineering job in the early 90s, Elaine said, "Your uncle filed a patent on a data compression method, narrow, technical, unglamorous, the kind of thing nobody notices until an entire industry quietly depends on it. He spent 30 years building a small licensing company around it. Meridian Systems. 5 employees, 1 product, the license itself. I've never heard of it," I said. "Most people haven't," Elaine said, "but your former employer has. Ridgeline Data Systems has held an exclusive license to Meridian's compression method for 6 years. It's the layer underneath the reconciliation engine you told me you built. Their entire product runs on it. The license is up for renewal in 90 days. A pause. "Your uncle held 90% of Meridian's systems outright. You are his only heir." I put the folder down, not dramatically. I just set it flat on the table and looked at the woman across from me. "There's a mistake." "There isn't," Elaine said. "His will was drafted 11 years ago and updated twice since. You were always the beneficiary. 10 days ago, I'd been walked out of a building for a stock grant that failed to vest by 51 minutes. Now a different folder, in a different office, was telling me I controlled the one company my old employer needed most, at the exact moment they needed it. "Walk me through the license terms," I said finally. "Every clause." Elaine nodded, like that was exactly the answer she'd been waiting for, and reached for the second folder. The first thing I did was nothing. People expect the story to move immediately at this point. A phone call, a confrontation, the satisfying machinery of a reversal set into motion right away. I understand that impulse. I felt it too, sitting in that office with the Capitol Dome outside the window, and my whole situation rearranged into a shape I didn't have a name for yet. But I'd spent 4 years learning exactly how Ridgeline made decisions when they thought nobody with real leverage was watching. They moved fast, they moved confidently, and they left a pattern lying around because they never imagined the person holding it would eventually be me. "I need 90 days, I told Elaine. A full review, the license terms, the renewal clause, and everything Ridgeline's done around employee equity over the last 2 years. The review ran quietly through an independent firm Elaine retained, entirely at the Meridian ownership level, invisible to Ridgeline, who had no idea the license they depended on had just changed hands entirely. What we found wasn't shocking so much as it was consistent. 7 engineers, including me, terminated within 2 weeks of a 4-year vesting cliff over an 18-month window. A pattern an outside employment attorney flagged as legally significant on its own. A wage and hour complaint from a support engineer named Devin Ruiz quietly settled with an NDA instead of back pay. A workplace safety citation on a server room cooling system, flagged 14 months earlier and never actually remediate, just marked, scheduled. I thought about Devin specifically. He trained me on the on-call rotation my first month at Ridgeline. 4 years later, I found out he'd been fighting for overtime pay the company owed him for over a year, quietly, alone, with nobody above him willing to look. That one's personal, that one specifically. My old teammate Owen texted me 3 weeks in. I let it sit for an hour before I answered. "Heard you got let go," he wrote. "That's insane timing. You doing okay?" "I'm fine," I wrote back, landing on my feet. "Everyone here's spooked," he wrote. "Feels like the cliffs aren't a coincidence anymore." I didn't tell him what I already knew. Not because I didn't trust him, because I owed the truth to a room, not a group chat, and I wasn't ready for that room yet. I went back to the license documents spread across my kitchen table, which had started collecting a second purpose entirely. Before I tell you what happened at that renewal meeting, drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done, holding the license the company that fired you couldn't survive without? And if you haven't hit subscribe yet, this is exactly where it starts to matter. By week 12, Elaine presented the full findings in a 3-hour meeting, the same conference room where I'd first learned what I actually owned. This time, I wasn't the one being told what to sign. 7 categories of documented concern. Sworn statements from 4 current and former Ridgeline employees who had been waiting a long time for someone with actual leverage to finally look their direction. The pattern around the vesting terminations is legally serious on its own, Elaine said. The wage claim is a separate exposure. The safety citation is documented and dated. What does Ridgeline think this meeting is? I asked. As far as they know, Elaine said. This is a routine licensing renewal with Meridian's new ownership following Walter's passing. Nothing in the meeting invite suggests otherwise. Good, I said. Keep it that way. I looked at Elaine directly. And I want Devin Ruiz's back pay released and that cooling system fixed before this meeting, out of Meridian's own funds if Ridgeline drags its feet. He's waited long enough. The renewal meeting was scheduled for a Thursday in October, in Ridgeline's own conference room, the same glass-walled room where I'd been handed a folder and 51 minutes. Grant had picked that room himself for renewals, years earlier, because the capital was visible through the window, and he liked mentioning it to visiting investors. I wore a plain charcoal blazer, the one I'd bought for a friend's father's funeral 2 years earlier and worn exactly once since. I pressed it the night before and hung it on the back of my bedroom door and looked at it for a while before I turned the lights off. I slept better than I expected to. It was overcast the morning of the meeting, the specific flat gray Austin sky that shows up maybe a dozen times a year. I stood at my bathroom mirror at 7:40 and looked at a face that had spent 4 years building software for a company that fired me 10 minutes before it owed me anything, and 90 days preparing to walk into that same conference room, owning the one thing they couldn't replace. I drove downtown, parked 2 blocks away, and walked into the building in the flat gray light, past a parking garage gate that no longer had any reason to recognize me at all. The receptionist checked my name against the visitor list, saw it printed under a meeting title that read Meridian Systems, Licensing Renewal, and something shifted in her expression. Not recognition exactly, more the dawning sense that the name and the company didn't add up to anything she'd been briefed on. I was the last to arrive. I didn't walk fast. I didn't announce myself from the doorway. I walked into that conference room the way you walk into a room you already know you don't need permission to be in. I saw Grant before he saw me, seated at the head of the table, already mid-sentence with someone from legal, phone face down in front of him, the posture of a man who had never once considered the possibility of this particular Thursday. His eyes found me. First, the automatic dismissive sweep he gave any late arrival. Then the correction. Then the longer, slower recalculation once he clocked Elaine Cho, standing just behind my shoulder with a folder that read Meridian Systems across the tab. The color changed in his face, not dramatically, just a shift, the way a room looks different when a single light gets adjusted. Elaine closed the door. "Good morning. I'd like to formally introduce Sasha Reyes, sole heir to the estate of Walter Reyes and majority owner of Meridian Systems. A brief pause. Effective today, the party you'll be negotiating your license renewal with. The silence that followed wasn't polite. It was the specific silence of a room full of people individually computing the same information and trying to keep their faces from giving anything away. Grant pushed back from his chair, not all the way, just enough to show the impulse. That can't be right. She was an engineer here. We terminated her position in July. You did, I said, walking to the empty seat at the head of the table across from him. 10 minutes before my equity vested, if we're being specific. Please, sit back down, Grant. He sat, slowly. The way a person sits when sitting is the only option left, and they already know it. I opened the folder Elaine had placed in front of me and looked around the room for a moment, at the legal team, at the 2 board observers who'd been invited as a courtesy, at every untouched water glass. And I thought about a parking garage gate, 6 minutes, and an equity grant that missed its own vesting timestamp by 51. Before we discuss renewal terms, I said, I want to be direct about what an independent review found over the last 90 days, because directness is the only thing that actually serves anyone in this room. I walked through the vesting cliff terminations first. 7 names, 7 dates, all within 2 weeks of a 4-year anniversary, cross-referenced against the exact days Ridgeline's own equity system logged forfeiture events. These separations were all legitimate business decisions, Grant said, sharper now. You don't have visibility into the performance conversations behind them. I have visibility into the timestamps, I said, without raising my voice, which show my badge was flagged for deactivation the night before anyone spoke to me. I have visibility into Devin Ruiz's overtime claim, settled with an NDA instead of the back pay he was actually owed. I have visibility into a server room safety citation that sat unresolved for 14 months. I let that sit. Nobody in the room was performing normalcy anymore. Meridian's license, I said, will not be renewed under the current terms. Effective today, I'm proposing a 90-day extension while we negotiate new terms that include an independent review of every vesting cliff termination from the last 2 years, and remediation for the employees affected. This matter is also being referred to council for a full liability assessment. Grant stood so fast his chair rolled back against the glass wall. This is about your termination. This is personal, Sasha. No, I said. This is what happens when the person holding the license finally has the standing to ask for something back. He left the room to make a phone call, not gracefully, but he left. The meeting closed 2 hours later with Ridgeline's board agreeing to the 90-day extension and an independent review of the termination pattern, rather than risk losing the license outright. Devin Ruiz's back pay cleared the following week. I saw the confirmation email before I saw almost anything else that day, and it stayed open on my phone longer than anything else did. Owen texted that evening. I let it sit for a minute. What happened in there? He wrote, Grant's been in a closed-door meeting with legal since 2 p.m. and nobody will say why. Ridgeline's compression license just changed hands. I wrote back. It's mine now, was my uncle's. A long pause. Wait, you own Meridian. Since about 10 days after they walked me out, I wrote. I didn't know it yet when I signed my exit paperwork. You could have told someone, he wrote. I owed the 7 of you a fair review, I wrote. I didn't owe Ridgeline a warning. He didn't have much to say to that. The conversation ended a few minutes later. The months that followed moved at the unhurried pace of consequences rather than drama. Grant was placed on leave pending the review's outcome. His reputation in the local tech scene, built entirely on being the executive who scaled Ridgeline's engineering org, went quiet fast, the way credibility tends to when the thing it was attached to starts getting questioned in rooms he isn't in anymore. Devin sent me a photo of his kid's new bike a few weeks later, bought with the back pay that had cleared. That photo stayed on my phone longer than anything else from that entire period. Owen called once more, in December, While I was on the back porch of the house, I just put a deposit on. The first thing with my name only on the deed in my entire adult life. I probably should have said something the day they walked you out, he said quietly, without the careful, uncertain tone of his earlier messages. Just tired. I let the silence sit for a moment. Some things deserve room. You didn't owe me anything that day, I said. Nobody on that floor did. Everyone just did the math on what saying something would cost them. He didn't answer right away. I watched a car pull into a driveway down the street. Ordinary December evening. This is what the other side of it actually looks like. Not triumph, just an ordinary evening. Here's what I'd tell anyone sitting in a conference room with a folder in front of them and 51 minutes on the clock. The thing that nearly broke me wasn't the stock grant. It wasn't the parking garage gate or the box with my dead plant inside it. It was the story I'd been telling myself for 4 years. That being good at unglamorous, load-bearing work meant being replaceable. That the people who keep a system running quietly are the easiest ones for a company to forget. That story was wrong. Real leverage isn't the folder someone slides toward you expecting a fast signature. It's the patience to find out exactly what you're actually holding before you ever say a word about it. I didn't become powerful the morning they walked me out with 51 minutes left on the clock. I became powerful 6 minutes earlier than that, sitting in my car at a gate that didn't recognize me anymore, deciding I wasn't going to respond to any of it with noise. Grant handed me a folder like it was the end of something. What he didn't know was that he'd handed it to the person who, 3 months later, would hold the one license his entire company couldn't survive without. He found out eventually. By then, I was already somewhere else. If this story landed for you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real workplace accounts like this one. Thank you for listening.